Thank you, Mr. President. I take this time as a senator from Maryland, but also as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to talk about the bill we voted on earlier today, the motion to proceed on the so-called SAFE Act, dealing with Syrian refugees. I'd like to call it the FEAR Act, because I think it really is an act that is misguided. And I start by saying that the world looks to the United States. And when there are tough problems, they look to our leadership. And they know that this country is prepared to step forward and provide the international leadership to deal with the toughest problems we face as a global community. And the bill that I call the FEAR Act would jeopardize America's response to one of the greatest humanitarian crises of our times. It would jeopardize the U.S. leadership on humanitarian issues, and would compromise, I think, U.S. security. And let me tell you why. We face the greatest crisis on refugees and displaced individuals since World War II. The number is about 60 million globally who are currently refugees or displaced. The largest numbers right now are coming out of Syria. Make no mistake about it, millions are coming out of Syria. And they're escaping the Assad regime's barrel bombs and gases and starvation policies. These are victims. These are people who are losing their lives because of the barbaric regime of President Assad. Our values are that we respond to those issues, that we act in a responsible way, that we help the international community to help those people who are trying to escape the persecutions of repressive regimes. The FEAR Act would shut down the U.S. process of accepting Syrian refugees. Why do I say it would shut it down? Because it would require the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence, all three, to certify on an individual basis the ability of these individuals to meet our standards to come into the United States. That would require 100 certifications per day per those individuals, 300 certifications totally. What else would they be doing? Well, I would hope the director of the FBI is working to keep our country safe and more than just dealing with the Syrian refugees. This would cut down and eliminate our ability to accept Syrian refugees. So let me just give you some of the numbers. The United States has accepted 2,000 Syrian refugees. There are millions of Syrian refugees. The total number the president has talked about is 10,000, a small fraction of the total numbers that are being relocated under the Syrian refugee program. When you look at the neighboring countries alone, what's being done in Jordan, what's being done in Lebanon, look at what Europe is accepting, we are taking a very small burden here, and it's individuals who do not pose a threat, and I want to explain that. Every one of us want to do everything we can to make sure that our homeland is safe. And I am prepared to do everything reasonable to make sure we keep Americans safe as we possibly can from the threat of extremists. So what do these Syrian refugees go through? And by the way, there's not been a reported case of a Syrian refugee in regards to terrorism. What do they go through? Well, first, they are screened by the High Commissioner on Refugees of the United Nations. They screen the individuals who are considered eligible to come to the United States. So you go through that screening process. They then are fingerprinted, and they go through a biometric check. They go through several layers of biographical and background screening. They're individually interviewed by U.S. officials, and it takes about 18 to 24 months. If you're a terrorist, you're not going to go through this. It's up to the potential individual who will come to the United States as a refugee to establish that they are a refugee. That means they must establish that they have been a victim of the terrorist activities in order to be able to get to the United States. And it's up to them to establish that burden. We don't accept individuals who cannot establish that burden. This is not the target group that we should be concerned about. The real threat to our homeland security. Let's take a look at others who come to this country. We already did this in the omnibus bill, but we know that under the visa waiver program, there are individuals who hold passports of countries that we have a visa waiver program with. That means they are countries that have relations with the United States, where we generally accept their visitors without a visa, that many of these countries have foreign fighters who have gone to the affected areas that could very well be involved in terrorist activities and then come back to the European country and could come to the United States under a visa waiver program. Well, we took some action against that in the last year's bill. That was good. We need to continue to scrutinize that. What we saw happen in California, where we had a spouse, that didn't come under the Syrian waiver program or Syria refugee program. They came under other visa programs. That needs to be scrutinized. People who come to America, we need to know that they're not connected to terrorist organizations. But, Mr. President, our greatest concern is the radicalization of Americans. We need to know why certain individuals do what they do. We have to have a better system to protect the homeland. So let's focus on what is really the problem areas for our country. If this bill were to be passed, it would actually make us less safe. It would affect our national security. And let me tell you the reason why. First, it would clearly diminish U.S. leadership. When we go and seek international support, particularly for our coalition against ISIL, our failure to be willing to take any of the Syrian refugees will certainly compromise America's credibility and ability to lead internationally. It would be used by ISIL as a propaganda. Make no mistake about that. They understand that this is what they're saying about America. It's against our values. It makes us weaker as a nation. It's for that reason, Mr. President, that we found that national security professionals from both parties, including Henry Kissinger, David Petraeus, Brent Scowcroft, Michael Chertoff, all have come out in opposition on the grounds that it would undermine our security and benefit ISIS. These are professionals. They understand the risk factors. What we should be doing is everything we can to protect us from the threat of ISIL. That means let's figure out ways that we can share intelligence information among all of our willing partners. Let's provide the leadership, particularly in those countries in which ISIL can operate, so that the governments represent all the communities. There's not a void, so that the Sunni minority population feel that their only safety is with ISIL. Let's make sure we cut off all of the financial support for ISIL, including their oil abilities and the transport of oil. And this is what the Obama administration is doing. Let's make sure that we do cut off any of their opportunities to expand their capacity. Let's deal with foreign fighters, people who come from Western countries that go to these areas and train. Let's make sure that we know where they are, and when they try to come back into one of the Western countries, that they are apprehended and tried because of their affiliation with terrorists. Let's help countries such as Jordan and Iraq and Lebanon that are taking on extreme burdens of the refugees so that they can deal with their own crisis that has been exaggerated because of the Syrian conflict and ISIL's information. In other words, let us work in a coordinated way to root out the main cause of the terrorist activities, that is ISIL's ability to attract supporters and to gain territory. Let's take away that territory. Let's coordinate our airstrikes. Let's work with the local forces on the ground. All that should be done, and we need to work together on it. To concentrate on the few thousand Syrian refugees who will be coming to this country, who have gone through the strictest vetting process, makes little sense and will not keep us safer, and as I indicated before, actually will compromise our national security. But let me talk in closing on what makes this nation the great nation it is. I think each of us know that we are living in a special country, a country that has stood up for freedom, a country that's been looked upon as the beacon of hope around the world, where many of our parents and grandparents have come from other countries in order to settle in this country because of its opportunity. I'm a student of history, not just because it's an effective factual counterpart to the bluster of politicians and social media accounts. History can be a touchstone to remind us of who we are and a lens through which we can see who we are. Throughout our history, we have recognized that even in times of war, we are fighting the leaders of authoritarian regimes and not their victims. Between 1945 to 1952, we resettled 400,000 displaced persons from the Nazi-controlled areas of Europe. Between the fall of Saigon in 1997, the United States rescued 883,000 plus refugees who fled Vietnam, a country with which we had been in a state of undeclared war that claimed 58,000 American lives. Between 1970 and 1991, we resettled 200,000 Jews to the United States from the Soviet Union, the very government which posed the greatest security threat the United States has ever known. This in addition to the hundreds of thousands of refugees we have resettled from Cuba and other countries behind the Iron Curtain. This Republican bill we consider today dishonors our proud history of providing a safe haven. But history can also be harsh and unsentimental. This bill risks repeating mistakes of the past, when the United States tragically turned away Jewish refugees in World War II. After the photo of Alan Kurdi, the 3-year-old who was washed up on a beach, was published in the news media, the American people opened their hearts to the Syrian people. The American people recognize the distinction between those who are the victims of terror and those who perpetrate it. We should not let knee-jerk reactions keep us from being the beacon of hope for Syrians and other refugees in the Middle East, Africa, and around the world. We should do what this nation does best, our values. Yes, we should never compromise homeland security. We need to do everything we can to keep Americans safe. We've got to make sure we have the strictest vetting procedures for anyone who wants to come to this country as a refugee or as a visitor. And we can always do a better job. And we have to do more to understand why Americans have been converted to radicalization through the internet and what has happened in social media. Yes, we need to do a much more effective job in keeping Americans safe and the homeland safe. But shutting down the Syrian refugee program would be a major mistake on our values of who we are as a nation and for our national security.